When I hit rock bottom, I sold myself into a marriage of convenience. Upon hearing the news, my younger sister cried her eyes out, telling me a man's dignity was worth more than all the money in the world. I just rolled my eyes at her. It is time to cash in on that dignity. Fortunately, Victoria kept her end of the bargain after we tied the knot. She treated both me and my sister incredibly well. Naturally, I played my part to perfection. At the corporate office, I was her flawless executive assistant. At home, I was her attentive, reliable house husband. As for her private life, I never asked a single question. I truly thought we would spend the rest of our lives in this quiet, transactional peace. Until the 3rd year of our marriage, when the one that got away finally returned from abroad. It was a Sunday. I was scrubbing the hardwood floors in the living room when my mother-in-law and father-in-law walked in, trailing a strange man behind them. Margaret did not even spare me a glance. She bypassed me completely and made a beeline for Victoria. "Victoria, look who I brought back for you." She shoved the man forward like he was a grand prize. Seeing him, Victoria froze. Her usually stoic, icy expression cracked for a fraction of a second. The man smiled, his tone dripping with intimate familiarity. "Long time no see, Victoria." I observed Victoria carefully. She maintained her composure, but the flicker in her eyes betrayed her. When she remained silent, the man did not miss a beat. He turned his attention directly to me. "You must be Dante. It is an absolute pleasure to meet you." I leaned against my mop handle and straightened my posture. "Really? Tell me, how much of a pleasure is it, exactly?" He clearly did not expect me to go entirely off script. He stood there, frozen in awkward silence. I took the opportunity to size him up. Wire-rimmed glasses, decent looking, with a polished academic vibe. But there was an unmistakable cunning glint in his eyes. I knew his type entirely too well. He was a perfect gentleman on the surface, but absolute poison underneath. The kind of sleazebag who would sell you broken glass and swear on his mother's grave it was a flawless diamond. Seeing me completely disrespect her golden boy, Margaret glared at me furiously. "Dante, where are your manners? Do you not see Ridley trying to shake your hand?" I glanced at Ridley's hand, which was still awkwardly suspended in the air, and gripped my mop tighter. "My hands are full, Margaret." With that, I ignored them and went back to scrubbing the floor. Margaret exploded, screaming insults at my back, but I tuned her out entirely. Eventually, Arthur pulled me into the kitchen to defuse the situation. "Let them catch up. You and I can get dinner started." I actually had no issues with my father-in-law. Like me, he had married into the family wealth. Technically, we were brothers in arms. Arthur closed the kitchen door tight and lowered his voice to a hushed whisper. "Dante, you need to watch your back with Ridley. He is Victoria's childhood sweetheart. Her first love. Your mother-in-law absolutely adores him." I narrowed my eyes. No wonder the guy walked in here like he owned the place. So this was the legendary one that got away. Why did they break up in the first place? Arthur sighed heavily. Youthful stubbornness, mostly. When they graduated college, Ridley wanted to move abroad, and Victoria needed to stay and inherit the family empire. Neither of them was willing to compromise, so they walked away angry. I nodded slowly. That definitely sounded like the Victoria I knew. In the 5 years we had known each other, I had never seen her bow her head to anyone. "So what is he doing here today?" Arthur rolled his eyes at me. "Are you dense?" He stepped off the plane and came straight here before even dropping his bags at home. "What do you think he wants?" "He is here to steal your wife." I clicked my tongue. If any other trophy husband were in this position, they might just swallow their pride and endure it. But I refused to back down. Even knowing that the destructive power of a first love rivaled a nuclear bomb, I had my own reasons to hold my ground. Once dinner was served, Margaret eagerly pulled Ridley to the dining table. Victoria sat directly across from them. Noticing Victoria kept her distance, Ridley smiled warmly at Margaret. "Actually, I think I will sit next to Victoria." Margaret playfully patted his arm. "You are exactly the same as you were back then, always wanting to be glued to her side. Go on." I was not about to let that happen. I ripped off my apron, practically sprinted to the table, and planted myself firmly in the chair right beside my wife. Victoria gave me a look of pure bewilderment at my blatant territorial display, but she kept her mouth shut. Since Victoria did not kick me away, Ridley had no choice but to awkwardly sit back down next to Margaret. Margaret rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck in her skull. I feigned absolute innocence. "Are your eyes bothering you, Margaret? Should I fetch you some eye drops?" Her face turned an ugly shade of purple as she let out a loud, dramatic scoff. Arthur shot me a warning glare while gently patting his wife's back to keep her from hyperventilating. Perhaps fearing I would actually give her mother a heart attack, Victoria cleared her throat. "Let us just eat." Throughout the meal, Victoria and I ate in silence while Margaret and Ridley whispered conspiratorially. Seeing that Victoria and I were not exchanging a single word, Ridley clearly thought he saw an opening. "Victoria, try the garlic shrimp. It is fantastic. Have some of this broccoli too, it is great for your health." Within minutes, he had piled a small mountain of food onto Victoria's plate. She frowned deeply and placed her silverware down. Ridley, you know I do not eat food that has been touched by someone else's utensils. I was practically doing cartwheels in my head. This idiot was completely out of practice. He was trying so hard to kiss up to her, but completely missed the mark. Seeing Ridley's mortification, Margaret immediately jumped to his rescue. Victoria, you were never like this before. Have you forgotten how Ridley always used to serve you food when you were younger? Victoria completely ignored her mother. She turned her head slightly toward me. Hubby, get me a piece of those ribs. I cannot reach them. Hearing her call me, that sent a jolt of pure satisfaction straight to my core. I immediately picked up a tender rib and fed it directly into her mouth. Margaret completely lost her mind. Victoria, what is the meaning of this? Ridley serves you food, and it is contaminated. Dante serves you food, and you eat it right out of his hand. Victoria's brows knitted together. Is there a problem? Ridley could not hold back anymore. Did you not just say you hate eating food touched by other people? Victoria stared at him with freezing indifference. Dante is my husband. He is not other people. Absolute perfection. In our 3 years of marriage, this was the very first time she had defended me so fiercely. Even if I was just a pawn she was using to spite her ex, I gladly accepted the role. Ridley's face darkened, his eyes glaring daggers at me. Did you cook all of this, Dante? I stayed silent, waiting for the punchline. It is decent, I suppose. You make an adequate stay-at-home husband. Margaret snorted. If he could not even handle basic chores, I would have thrown him out on the street years ago. Ridley waved his hands in mock humility. Now do not say that. Finding a willing, live-in maid is not easy these days. I really should thank him for taking such good care of Victoria while I was gone. Margaret nodded in vehement agreement. You are entirely right. I ignored their pathetic little duet, keeping my peripheral vision locked entirely on Victoria. She had put her utensils down entirely, her eyes locked onto her mother and Ridley in absolute disgust. Sensing Victoria's intense glare, Ridley offered a weak laugh. Just making a joke, Dante. You are not offended, are you? I let out a cold, sharp laugh. Your jokes are almost as laughable as your face. That struck a massive nerve. What did you just say about my face? Before I could even open my mouth, Victoria let out a genuine chuckle. It was a sound completely devoid of warmth. It was pure, unadulterated mockery. Margaret slammed her hand onto the mahogany table. What exactly is so funny, Victoria? Victoria dabbed the corners of her mouth with a linen napkin, her voice terrifyingly calm. When someone is genuinely attractive and you call them ugly, they never get angry. Because they know you are just projecting your own insecurities. But when someone is actually ugly and you point it out, they lose their minds. Because they know you are telling the absolute truth. I burst into genuine laughter. Even Arthur had to cover his mouth to hide his amusement. A stoic person delivering a deadpan insult was utterly lethal. To be entirely fair, Ridley was not a bad-looking guy. But compared to my near-flawless genetics, he did not stand a chance. Furious and utterly humiliated, Ridley grabbed his coat and stormed out without another word. The parasite was finally gone. We happily resumed our dinner, leaving Margaret to stew in her own toxic rage. After dessert, Margaret dragged Victoria into the study. Arthur and I cleared the table. I could not hide my smug grin. Honestly, Arthur, if that is the legendary first love, I am incredibly underwhelmed. Arthur's expression turned grim. Do not get cocky, Dante. Ridley is her first love. Do you have any idea how much weight that carries? His words hit me like a bucket of ice water, completely sobering me up. He was right. Whoever truly forgets their first love, even after years of silence, there is always a lingering ghost in the back of the mind. The road ahead was going to be brutal. When Victoria finally emerged from the study, she looked exhausted. After her parents left, she collapsed onto the velvet sofa, rubbing her temples. Dante, do not bother coming into the office tomorrow. I need to go out with Ridley. I agreed instantly. Sounds good. I wanted to visit the hospital tomorrow anyway to see Sophie. She looked up, clearly caught off guard. You are not even going to ask where Ridley and I are going? I shook my head. We set the rules when we got married. I do not interfere in your private life. She let out a sharp, frustrated breath and marched straight to the master bedroom, slamming the door shut. She was clearly angry. I freely admit that after 3 years of marriage, I still had absolutely no idea how to navigate her erratic moods. When I woke up the next morning, Victoria was already gone. After forcing down a quick breakfast, I drove straight to the medical center. Lying in her stark white bed, Sophie looked up at me with tear-filled eyes. Dante, my legs hurt. A heavy weight dropped in my stomach. The phantom limb pain was back. It is okay, sweetie. The pain will go away soon. Sophie immediately dropped the pitiful act, her eyes widening in mock terror. Wait, you are not planning to pull the plug on me, are you? Never mind, I feel completely fine now. I glared at her, but a laugh slipped out anyway. She had always been a chaotic, bright spark of energy. If it had not been for that catastrophic car crash 3 years ago that paralyzed her from the chest down, she would be thriving on a college campus right now. After calling the specialist in and adjusting her medication, the color finally returned to her cheeks. So I heard the CEO's golden boy is back in town. Are you going to be out of a job? Of course, she never missed an opportunity to roast me. I gave her a stern look. Are you hoping I get fired? Because if I lose this gig, what happens to you? I will have to drag you out to the sidewalk, so we can beg on a street corner. Sophie pictured the melodramatic scene and let out a bright, infectious laugh. You better kiss up to your wife then. Give her the absolute best service. Our entire financial future rests on your ability to be a trophy husband. We joked around for another hour. Just as I was gathering my things to leave, the door swung open. Victoria and Ridley walked into the room. Seeing the two of them together, Sophie's smile vanished. She turned her head toward the window, completely ignoring them. I gently patted her shoulder until she reluctantly muttered a quiet greeting to Victoria. Victoria walked up to the bed, gently brushing a stray lock of hair from Sophie's forehead. Ridley heard about what happened to you and insisted on stopping by. I gave him a stiff nod. Thanks for your concern. Ridley placed a generic fruit basket on the table and leaned over the bed, inspecting Sophie like she was a science experiment. I saw plenty of paralyzed patients while I was living in Europe. The medical bills and the round-the-clock care are astronomically expensive. Dante, this facility cannot be cheap. Victoria's face instantly hardened into stone. I narrowed my eyes at him. What is your point? Ridley pretended not to notice my hostility and kept talking. My point is, if Victoria is the one footing this massive bill, you are an incredibly pathetic excuse for a man. You cannot even afford to keep your own sister alive. I shot a panicked look at Sophie. Her eyes were already turning red. When she first found out I had sold myself into a marriage of convenience to pay her medical bills, she had begged the doctors to stop her treatments. Victoria and I spent weeks convincing her to stay alive. Now, with the topic of money thrown directly in her face, I knew she was silently suffocating. Victoria suddenly stood up, her voice sharp. Ridley, we are leaving. We have business to attend to. Without waiting for a response, she grabbed his arm and practically dragged him out of the room. Once they were gone, I spent an hour desperately trying to comfort my sister. It took everything she had to force a weak, unconvincing smile. I am fine, Dante. Do not worry about me. You should go home and get some rest. After making absolute sure she was stable, I left the hospital. That evening, Victoria called to say she was busy and told me not to wait up. I did not ask what she was doing. But after hanging up, the intrusive thoughts consumed me. Was she with Ridley? What were they doing right now? Eventually, I laughed at my own pathetic paranoia. I was just a contract husband. I had absolutely no right to monitor her life. I forced myself to go to sleep. In the dead of night, a violent, suffocating panic jolted me awake. I touched my chest. Cold sweat clung to my skin like a second layer. When my phone began ringing in the silent darkness, a wave of pure dread washed over me. I dropped the phone and drove to the hospital like a madman, my mind completely detached from reality. It was not until I stood in the freezing morgue, staring at Sophie's pale, lifeless face, that I realized it was not a nightmare. I am so sorry. By the time the night nurse found her, it was too late. The head doctor's apologies faded into a muffled buzz. My eyes were locked onto the life support tubing she still gripped in her rigid hand. My stupid, brave little sister. How much agony did she endure when she ripped those out of her own body? I packed up her belongings in total, crushing silence. A massive, gaping void had carved itself into my chest. I could not tell if it was pure grief or a terrifying sense of relief. 3 years. Over 1,000 days trapped in a broken body. She must have been so incredibly tired of existing like that. I understood now. Her relentless optimism and laughter were nothing but a shield to protect me from her pain. But I was selfish. I just wanted my only remaining family member to stay tethered to this earth, no matter the cost. Now she was finally free. It was a mercy. After burying her ashes next to our parents, I returned to the empty house. I sat alone on the velvet sofa, my thumbs gently tracing the cracked screen of her phone. With trembling hands, I typed in the passcode. It was my birthday. It had never changed. I opened her voice memos, clicked on the final unsent recording, and finally broke down. See, I knew you would cry. I always win. Dante, I am going away now. Do not blame yourself and do not carry this guilt. You are the greatest brother in the world. I have a secret. Mom and Dad visited me in my dreams last night. They asked me if we still had a home. I told them yes. I told them we still had each other. Dante, I did not want to leave you, but I refuse to be selfish anymore. If I stay, I will drag you down until you drown. Go live the life you actually want to live. You do not have to be a trophy husband anymore. You do not have to be a caretaker anymore. The recording played on an endless loop as the oxygen slowly abandoned my lungs. When the sun finally crested the horizon, I buried my grief, grabbed my keys, and drove to the corporate office. It was time to end this. The corporate headquarters of the Vance Group was a towering pillar of glass and steel, gleaming in the cold morning light. I walked through the double glass doors of the executive suite, my footsteps perfectly silent on the plush carpet. I was no longer wearing the comfortable linen house clothes Victoria liked me to wear at home. I was in a tailored, charcoal gray three-piece suit, the uniform of the flawless executive assistant I had been for 3 years. When I pushed open the door to the CEO's office, I wasn't surprised to find Ridley there. He was sitting on the corner of Victoria's massive mahogany desk, holding a cup of espresso, laughing at some private joke. Victoria was sitting in her leather executive chair, reviewing a document. When the door opened, they both looked up. "Dante," Victoria said, her brow furrowing slightly. "I thought I told you not to come in today." "You did," I said, my voice quiet, even, and entirely devoid of the warmth I usually used to greet her. I walked over to the desk, pulled 2 documents from my leather briefcase, and laid them flat on the polished mahogany. One was my formal resignation letter as her executive assistant. The other was the finalized, uncontested divorce agreement already signed by me. "Resignation," I said, tapping the first paper. "And divorce. I've already signed the asset division waiver. I don't want a single penny of the Vance family fortune." The room went dead silent. Victoria froze. Her stoic, icy composure cracked, her eyes staring at my signature on the divorce papers with a sudden, suffocating panic. Ridley, however, let out a sharp, mocking laugh. He stood up, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, looking at me with a smirk of absolute triumph. Well, I suppose the live-in maid finally realized he's out of his depth. "Dante, you really are a pathetic excuse for a man running away because of a little competition." I didn't look at Ridley. I didn't even spare him a glance. I kept my eyes locked, entirely on Victoria's face. "Dante, what is the meaning of this?" Victoria demanded, her voice tight, a rare tremor of fear bleeding through her stoic mask. "Is this because of yesterday? I told you Ridley's overseas firm is partnering with us on our logistics expansion. It is strictly business. Why are you being so sensitive?" "Sophie is dead, Victoria," I said softly. The word dead hung in the air like a cold, physical blade. Victoria's breath caught in her throat. She stood up so fast her leather chair screeched against the hardwood floor. "What? No. She was fine yesterday. The doctor said she was stable." She was stable until Ridley walked into her hospital room and told her she was a pathetic burden who was dragging me down to the streets. I said, my tone as flat and clinical as a coroner's report. "She ripped out her own life support tubing last night. She's gone." Victoria fell back into her chair, her face completely drained of color. She stared at me, her lips parting but no words coming out. Ridley's smirk instantly vanished. He took a hasty step back, his eyes darting shiftily. I didn't mean it like that. I was just making a point about finance. She must have been mentally unstable already." "Shut up, Ridley," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but it carried a terrifying weight that made him instantly close his mouth. I looked at Victoria one last time. "The contract is concluded, Victoria. The only reason I married you was to pay her bills. Now that there are no more bills to pay, I'm leaving." I turned on my heel and walked out of the office. Dante, wait." Victoria's voice screamed behind me. I heard her running across the suite, her high heels clicking furiously against the floor. She grabbed my arm in the hallway, her face covered in tears, a sight none of her employees had ever seen. "Please don't do this," she sobbed, her fingers digging into my suit jacket. "We can fix this. I'll fire Ridley. I'll cancel the partnership. I love you, Dante. I've loved you for a long time. Please don't leave me." I gently, but firmly, pried her fingers from my sleeve, stepping back to create a polite, freezing distance between us. "We had a transactional peace, Victoria," I said softly. "But you broke the transaction when you let your first love kill my sister. The contract is over." I turned and walked toward the elevators, not looking back even once. 6 months later, the city's financial district was a sprawling jungle of glass and neon, and at its absolute center stood the crown jewel of the new market, Aegis Holdings. Aegis was a newly established private equity firm that had quietly but aggressively swept up 80% of the city's supply chain and logistics market over the last 6 months. They were ruthless, efficient, and backed by an anonymous, massive pool of capital. I stood in the penthouse office of Aegis, looking out over the city skyline. I was wearing a bespoke black suit, my hair styled back, my posture carrying a cold, quiet authority. I was no longer a trophy husband or a house cleaner. I was the chief executive officer of Aegis Holdings. My father-in-law, Arthur, walked into the office, carrying 2 glasses of scotch. He looked at me with a proud, genuine smile. "You've done an incredible job, Dante," Arthur said, handing me a glass. "In 6 months, you've built an empire that completely rivals the Vance Group." "I had a good mentor, Arthur," I said, clinking my glass against his. "And your silent backing was what made it possible." Arthur had been the one to find me after I left Victoria. He had known how brilliant I actually was. After all, I had managed Victoria's entire executive, schedule and corporate logistics strategies behind the scenes for 3 years. He had quietly offered me the capital to start Aegis, using his own private assets to cut his ties with Margaret and the toxic Vance family politics. "They're in trouble, Dante," Arthur said, taking a sip of his scotch. "Margaret pushed Victoria to sign the joint venture with Ridley's overseas firm. But Ridley's firm was a shell. He was hemorrhaging cash in Europe, and he's been embezzling Vance Group funds to pay off his own foreign debts." "I know," I said, a cold smile spreading across my face. "I've been tracking his transfers for 3 months. The trap is set." "The shareholder meeting is at 2 p.m. today," Arthur said, his eyes sharp. "Are you ready to close the curtain?" "I'm ready," I said. The grand boardroom of the Vance Group was filled with the city's top investors and board members. Margaret sat at the head of the table, looking incredibly smug and arrogant. Ridley sat beside her, wearing his signature wire-rimmed glasses, though his face was pale and covered in a thin sheen of sweat. He kept tapping his fingers against his leather folder, his anxiety plain to see. Victoria sat opposite them, looking thin, hollow, and exhausted. She hadn't smiled once in 6 months. Her eyes were fixed on the empty chair beside her, the seat I used to occupy. "Honored shareholders," Margaret announced, her voice booming through the room. "Today, we are finalizing the merger with Ridley's European Logistics Group. This partnership will secure our dominance in the international market for the next decade." "Wait," a calm, authoritative voice interrupted from the doorway. The heavy double doors of the boardroom were pushed open, and I walked in, followed by a team of federal financial investigators and Arthur. The room went dead silent. Victoria stood up, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes widening in pure, agonizing shock. "Dante." Margaret's face instantly twisted into a sneer. "Dante, what are you doing here? This is a closed-door board meeting. Security, throw this loser out." "I am the majority shareholder of Aegis Holdings, Margaret," I said, my voice quiet but cutting through the room like a scalpel. "And as of 9 o'clock this morning, Aegis has acquired 51% of the Vance Group's outstanding debt. I am the owner of this room." I walked over to the table and tossed a thick folder of documents directly in front of the board directors. "And this," I continued, "is the official forensic audit of Ridley's European shell company. Over the last 4 months, Ridley has transferred $42 million of Vance Group operational capital to offshore accounts in Switzerland to pay off his personal gambling and investment debts." The room erupted into absolute, frantic chaos. Board members scrambled to grab the documents, their faces turning pale as they read the transfer logs. "No, this is a lie. This is a fabrication," Ridley screamed, standing up so fast his glasses slipped from his nose. "He's just a jealous house husband. He's trying to ruin me. The federal investigators behind me have already frozen your accounts, Ridley," I said coolly, "and they have a warrant for your arrest for corporate embezzlement and wire fraud." 2 uniformed federal agents stepped into the room, quickly clicking handcuffs around Ridley's wrists. He crumpled to the floor, weeping and babbling, his polished, gentlemanly mask completely shattered into dust. Margaret sat in her chair, frozen in absolute, paralyzing terror. Her golden boy was a fraud, and her family's empire was now entirely in my hands. Once the board members and investigators had cleared the room, only Victoria and I remained in the grand boardroom. The silence was deafening. Victoria walked up to me, her body trembling, her eyes filled with a deep, crushing regret that had been building for 6 months. She looked at my tailored suit, my cold, powerful aura, and realized that the trophy husband she had taken for granted was actually a king. "Dante," she whispered, her voice cracked. I made a mistake. I was so blinded by my pride, by my memory of Ridley. I didn't see what was right in front of me. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about Sophie." She reached out, her fingers trembling as she tried to touch my sleeve. "Please, let me make it up to you," she sobbed. "We can rebuild the company together. I'll sign whatever you want. Just come home." I looked down at her, and for the first time, I felt absolutely nothing. No, Anger, no sorrow, not even a trace of the old, transactional peace. Victoria, I said softly, stepping back to let her hand fall. The home we had was built on Sophie's survival. When she died, the house collapsed. I pulled my sister's cracked phone from my pocket, letting the final recording play in the quiet room. Sophie's bright, beautiful laugh echoed through the boardroom. Go live the life you actually want to live. You do not have to be a trophy husband anymore. I looked at Victoria one last time. I'm finally living that life, Victoria. And you aren't in it. I turned and walked out of the boardroom, my footsteps confident and steady on the marble floor. I didn't look back. As I stepped out of the glass building, the cool afternoon breeze swept across my face, carrying the scent of autumn and clean asphalt. I drove down to the quiet, sunny beach where we had scattered Sophie's ashes. I stood on the sand, watching the white waves crashing gently against the shore, and took a deep, clean breath of the ocean air. I won, Sophie, I whispered to the wind. I'm finally free.